Firstly, let me define stress. Stress, the moment you perceive you can't manage the pressure, whatever that pressure is, be it at work, too much work, relationship difficulties, your body goes through a stress response. So your body goes through fight, flight or freeze. And what's very interesting, what happens to the brain? For example, the moment your body goes into a stress response, 60% of the frontal part of your brain starts to shut down. And we need the frontal part of the brain for decision making, analytical. You think about the frontal part of your brain as the chief exec center of the brain. The chief exec center makes the decisions, thinks about the decisions, thinks through the decisions. Now, if you only have 40% availability, it's going to reduce your decision making. So without a shadow of doubt, the moment you become stressed is the moment your decision making abilities go out the window by about 60%. So you're going to be making decisions which are irrational. Interestingly, the part of the brain that's responsible for emotions, the amygdala, it stays on, it doesn't shut down. So you have 100% availability of the emotional center and only 40% of the analytical. So is it a surprise you get annoyed possibly easier? Is it a surprise you may become more emotional? Because in essence, the front bit of the brain, left side more or less, tells the right side, stop it. But you don't have that availability. So it reduces your resilience. When your resilience decreases, your stress increases. When your stress increases, your resilience decreases. So within that circle, there has to be a point where you stop that. So what can you do to help switch that part of the brain that starts to shut down, the frontal bit, back on? One of the best things you can do is to step back, come away from the situation and start to breathe. Take what I call a 3-minute breathing space. So step back, move away, breathe in through your nose and then out through your mouth. So it's literally like this. The moment you do that, you start to change the stress response. You start to switch on that part of the brain, suddenly starts to go like this. And it means then you're starting to manage your stress, increasing your resilience. It only takes around 3 minutes, but you need to take responsibility for doing that. Most people who are in a stress response don't want to do anything about it. Their body's wanting them to stay there. So you have to make a decision, a choice to do that. Small things done consistently make a difference. This is the one thing, if you do it time and time again, starts to rewire your brain and increase your resilience. So taking responsibility, it's a key area of resilience. In other words, taking responsibility for the choices you make. Now, if you're at work and you've got too much work, it's really your responsibility to let your boss know you have too much work, or to let your manager know. Because if you don't and you miss your deadlines, it's going to affect the way they perceive you. And it's really your responsibility. And if you're not setting the boundaries around workload, taking responsibility for setting those boundaries, it will absolutely influence your resilience because it will increase your stress. So stress, resilience, taking responsibility, there's a relationship between each of them. So taking responsibility is key. The moment you take responsibility for something that's not working in your life, be it at work or home, it increases your choices. If something's not working, generally 2 choices: change it or get rid of it. And within changing it may mean you change yourself. It absolutely increases your ability to respond to a situation the moment you take responsibility. So how do you take responsibility? On my training courses, very often people become really resentful about the idea of taking responsibility for something that's not theirs. Well, absolutely. Why would you need to take responsibility if it's, it's not yours? You're responsible for the way you react to it. Not for what's happening, but for how you react to it. So the moment you get that concept, it's not about the situation, it's your reaction to it. And that's where taking responsibility comes into its own. It increases your ability to make choices. There's a difference between accepting a situation that's completely out of your control to being resigned to that situation. Acceptance is much more active. Resignation, being resigned, is a very passive, form of living day in, day out. So for the purposes of resilience, it's always about a more of an acceptance than a resignation. Managing emotions are the glue of resilience. So the way you manage emotions are key. Emotions are never the problem. The way you react and respond to those emotions, that can be where the problem lays. For example, the moment you get angry, you begin to distort the view of reality. A little bit like the moment you put the sunglasses on, your sunglasses, your reality changes, you see things differently. Any negative emotion, for example, anger, anxiety, upset, sadness, the emotions that make you feel negatively. So one of the key things to remember is that the emotions are not the problem, the way you respond to them are. So what can you start to do? If you get angry at work, if you get angry at home, if you're upset, if you're anxious, etc. A great tip for managing difficult emotions, whatever's difficult for you. Some people find sadness difficult, some people find anger, anxiety. So whatever's difficult is to step back from that emotion and have a picture of a remote in your head, a remote. So you press pause, in other words, step back. Take a 3-minute breathing space. So start to breathe in through your nose, out through your mouth, in through your nose, out through your mouth. So after around 3 minutes, you'll start to feel differently. Now there's no point in going over and over and over why you're angry, why you're upset. It simply increases the intensity of that emotion. So replace it with a different thought. You can't have 2 different thoughts at the same time. You can't think about why you're angry, upset, and think of a different word. So I usually suggest using the word calm or stop. So instead of thinking why you're angry, just keep saying stop, 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 or calm, 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 until you start to feel different. Now, rewind. How did it get to that point? Do I need to take responsibility? What do I need to do? Fast forward. Okay, if I did this, what would happen? If I did that, what would happen? If I did this? So you're becoming more solution focused. So you've acknowledged your emotion, you've stepped back from it, and you haven't allowed that emotion to take over. So part of resilience is being optimistic, and I think optimism personally is really overrated, because most people who I know who are overly optimistic or optimistic per se, in my experience, they're not addressing any negatives. So pragmatic optimism means that you focus on the positive but you manage the negatives. See, when you start to do that, you're managing the negatives, you increase your resilience, and you have a hopeful approach to a situation. Even within optimism, it's really quite pragmatic. It's not fantastical optimism or optimism. For resilience, pragmatic optimism, that works best, because you're able to manage the negatives, focus on the positives. So for example, let's say you're going through a difficult change at work, nothing you could do, possibly a restructuring. Well, if there's nothing you can do about the restructuring, instead of waiting and hoping that everything's going to be okay, which would be optimism, pragmatic optimism would be hoping everything would be okay and focusing on that, as well as going to, well, what if it's not? What do I need to do? So update your CV, get the word out, do whatever it is you need to do. See, that's pragmatic optimism rather than optimism per se. How can you increase your pragmatic optimism? Well, simply focusing on the positive, whatever the situation is, you focus on the positive, and then you go to worst case scenario, what could happen if this happened, and then come up with a solution. And that solution needs to be one thing you'll do within the next 3 days toward that solution. Don't leave it past 3 days. Most people, if they're just optimistic, they then don't do it, etc. So 3 days. Secondly, the best case scenario. Great, if maybe it won't happen, that's great. Focus on that. but also look at the worst case scenario and do something about it. There's no point in just thinking about it. You need to actually do something as well. So small things done consistently make a difference for resilience. So when you start to manage your emotions every day, when you start to take responsibility every day, and you start to manage your stress every day, and incidentally, one thing you can do to manage stress, small thing, is to take a lunch break, even if it's only 10 minutes. You do that every day, you start to manage the stress at work. So these small things make a big difference every day. Become more pragmatically optimistic. Every day makes a difference. Setting boundaries, again, another part of resilience. So in order to set boundaries, you need to take responsibility. So if you've got too much work, you need to take responsibility for setting boundaries around your workload. So that means you may need to have a conversation with your manager, you may need to manage your own time. So boundaries can be with other people as well as yourself. If it's time management, then are you spending a lot of your time sort of daydreaming, focusing on other things, or are you spending a lot of your time really quite focused? Are you taking the breaks necessary to allow you to be focused? If not, then take responsibility for setting boundaries around lunch, around tea breaks. So setting boundaries, it's all about taking responsibility. So again, taking responsibilities and boundaries go hand in hand. So some of the boundaries for work would be possibly a boundary around emails. So we work in a society where it's 24/7 emails. So do you have a boundary around it? For example, if you're wanting to get some kind of work-life balance, do you have perhaps one evening per week where it's computer, email, phone free? So you can give that time to your family. Or are you on constant alert with emails? So let me just tell you what happens when you retrieve an email at home that's negative, where you become angry. Your body goes into a stress response, shut down 60%, you become more irritated. If you have a family, you're going to be more irritated with them. So invariably, they take the brunt of you not having a boundary around emails. So it's a silly thing, but just doing that small thing consistently, week in, week out, it means your family know that that evening is especially for them. And that helps. If you don't have that, it becomes a free-for-all. And if you are answering emails at 11 o'clock in the evening and sending emails, especially if you're a manager, to somebody who you're managing at 11, 12 o'clock, think about the expectation you're sending to that person. It's unsaid, but what are you really saying? Have you vocalized, communicated with that person? Have you set a boundary? Quite simply, not expecting you to answer the email, respond to the email, not expecting that at all. It's just how I work. So setting boundaries, if you're a manager, around that's really key.